I didn't get very far. I couldn't move as quickly as Mother to begin with, and anyway, the front of the house had a stand of bushes that I felt compelled to mark. She didn't wait for me, never even looked back. The last I saw of my mother, she was doing what she did best, sliding into the shadows, unnoticed, unseen. There was a time not long ago when all I wanted out of life was an opportunity to snuggle up to Mother, when her tongue and her warm body meant more to me than anything else. But now, watching her disappear, I understood that by leaving me behind, she was simply doing what all mother dogs must do eventually. The compulsion to follow had been the last reflexive gesture in a relationship that had forever changed the day our family arrived at the yard. My leg was still in the air when Senora came out on her porch, stopping when she saw me. "Why, Toby, how did you get out?" If I wanted to get away, I needed to run now, which was, of course, not what I did. Instead, I wagged my tail and jumped up on Senora's legs, trying to lick her face. Her flowery smell was enlivened with a wonderfully greasy chicken odor. She smoothed my ears back, and I followed her, addicted to her touch, as she strode rapidly around to the still open gate, the dog pack slumbering inertly inside the yard. She gave me a gentle nudge and followed me in. The moment the gate shut, the other dogs were on their feet, racing over to us, and Senora petted them and talked soothingly while I seethed a little over the divided attention. It seemed more than a little unfair. I'd given up Mother to be with Senora, and here she was acting as if I were no more special than anybody else. When Senora left, the gate clanked into place with a solid metallic sound, but I would never again regard it as an impassable barrier. I was wrestling with Coco when Mother returned a few days later. At least I thought it was my mother. I was distracted by a new wrinkle in our continuous wrestling match, one where I would circle behind Coco and climb up on her back, gripping her with my forelimbs. It was a wonderful game, and I couldn't understand why Coco was so surly about it, twisting and snarling at me. It felt so right. How could she be so unreceptive? I looked up when Bobby opened the gate, and there was Mother, standing uncertainly. Joyously, I tore across the yard, leading a charge of dogs, but I slowed down when I got closer. This female dog was marked the same as Mother, with a splotch of black over one eye, and had the stubby snout and short coat. But it wasn't Mother. She squatted and urinated submissively at our approach. I circled the new dog with the others, though Fast marched right up to her to sniff at her rear end. Bobby had the same defeated sag to his shoulders as when he had loaded us all into the truck the first time, but he stood close to the dog, protecting her with his body. "You'll be okay, girl," he said. It was Sister. I had nearly forgotten all about her, and now, inspecting her, I realized how different life must be on the other side of the fence. She was thin, her ribs plainly visible, and a white oozing scar tracked down her side. Her mouth smelled of rotten food, and when she squatted, a sickly odor came from her bladder. Fast was overjoyed, but Sister was too cowed by the rest of the pack to accept his offer of play. She groveled in front of Top Dog and let all of the canines sniff her, without making a single move to establish any boundaries. When they contemptuously dismissed her, Sister furtively inspected the empty feeding trough and drank some water as if she were stealing. This was what happened to dogs who tried to live in the world without people. They became beaten down, defeated, starved. Sister was what we all would have become if we had stayed in the culvert. Fast clung to her side the whole time. It occurred to me that Sister had always been his favorite, more important to him than even Mother. I watched him kiss Sister and bow toward her without jealousy. I had Coco. What did make me jealous was the attention Coco was getting from some of the other males, who seemed to think they could wander over and play with her as if I weren't there, which I suppose they could. I knew my position in the pack and was happy for the sense of order and security it provided me, but I wanted Coco for myself and didn't appreciate it when I was rudely shouldered out of the way. The males all seemed to want to play the game I'd invented, circling behind Coco and trying to jump on her. But I noted with cold satisfaction that she had no interest in playing this game with them either. The morning after Sister arrived, Bobby came into the yard and took Fast, Sister, Coco, and one other young male, a frisky spotted hound the men called Down, and put them all with me in a cage in the back of the truck. It was crowded and noisy, but I loved the high-velocity airstream and the expression on Fast's face when I sneezed on him. Astoundingly, a long-haired female dog from the pack rode in the cab with Carlos and Bobby. Why did she get to be a front-seat dog? I wondered. And why, when her scent flowed from the open windows, did a shiver pass through me, making me feel an urgent wildness? We parked next to an old gnarly tree that provided the only visible shade in a hot parking lot. Bobby went inside the building with the female from the cab, while Carlos came around to the cage door. All of us except Sister surged forward. "Come on, Coco." "Coco," Carlos said. I could smell peanuts and berries on his fingers, plus something sweet I couldn't identify. We all barked jealously as Coco was led into the building, and then we barked because we were barking. A large black bird landed in the tree above us and stared down at us as if we were idiots, so we barked at it for a while. Bobby came back out to the truck. "Toby?" he called. Proudly I stepped forward, accepting a loop of leather around my neck before jumping down onto the pavement, which was so hot it hurt my feet. I didn't even glance back at the losers in the cage as I entered the building, which was astoundingly cool and redolent with the smells of dogs and other animals. Bobby led me down a hallway and then picked me up and dropped me on a shiny table. A woman entered, and I thumped my tail as she put her soft, gentle fingers in my ears and probed under my throat. Her hand smelled of a strong chemical, though her clothes smelled of other animals, including Coco. "What's this one?" she asked. "Toby," Bobby said. I wagged harder when I heard my name. "How many did you say today?" While she and Bobby spoke, she lifted back my gums to admire my teeth. "3 males, 3 bitches." "Bobby," the woman said. I wagged my tail because I recognized his name. I know. "She's going to get into trouble," the woman said. She was feeling me up and down, and I wondered if it would be okay if I groaned with pleasure. "There are no neighbors to complain." "Still, there are laws. She can't just keep taking on more dogs. There are already too many. It's not sanitary." "She says otherwise. The dogs all die. There are not enough people to take them on." "It is against the law." "Oh, please don't tell, Doctor." "You put me in a bad position, Bobby. I have to be concerned with their welfare." "We bring them to you if they are sick." "Someone is going to file a complaint, Bobby." "Please don't." "Oh, not me. I'm not going to say anything without telling you first. Give you a chance to find a solution." "Okay, Toby?" I gave her a lick on the hand. "Good boy. We're going to get you into surgery now. Fix you right up." Bobby chuckled. Soon I was in another room, brightly lit but deliciously cool, full of the strong chemical smell that came off the nice lady. Bobby held me tightly and I lay still, somehow sensing this was what he wanted. It felt good to be held like that, and I thumped my tail. I felt a brief, sharp pain behind my neck, but I didn't complain, wagging vigorously to show that I didn't mind. The next thing I knew, I was back in the yard. I opened my eyes and tried to stand up, but my back legs weren't working. I was thirsty, but too tired to go get water. I put my head down and went back to sleep. When I awoke, I was instantly aware that there was something around my neck. A white cone of some kind. So stupid looking, I worried I might be dismissed from the pack. I had an aching, itchy feeling between my back legs, though I couldn't get at it with my teeth because of the silly collar. I stumbled over to the faucet and drank a little, my stomach queasy and my underside very, very sore. I could tell by the smells in the yard that I had missed supper, but I couldn't have cared less at that point. I found a cool patch of earth and flopped down with a groan. Fast was lying there, and he looked over at me. He, too, was wearing the ridiculous collar. What had Bobby done to us? The 3 females who had gone with us to the building with the nice lady were nowhere to be seen. The next day I limped around the yard, sniffing for signs of Coco, but there was no evidence that she had come back with us. Aside from the humiliation of the stupid collar, I also had to suffer the indignity of an inspection of the sore area by every male in the pack. Top Dog flipped me over on my back with a not-so-gentle shove, and I lay there in misery as first he and then the other males sniffed me with undisguised contempt. They didn't try the same thing with the females, who bounded into the yard a few days later. I was overjoyed to see Coco, who also wore the strange collar, and Fast did his best to comfort Sister, who plainly felt the entire process had been traumatizing. Carlos eventually removed the collars, and from that point on I found myself somehow less interested in the game where I climbed on Coco's back. Instead, I had a new game, where I would strut up to Coco with a rubber bone and chew it right in front of her, tossing it up in the air and dropping it. She would pretend she didn't want it, looking away, but her eyes always came back to the bone when I nudged it toward her with my nose. Finally, she would lose control and lunge, but I knew her so well I could snatch the bone away before she closed her jaws on it. I would dance back, wagging joyfully, and sometimes she would chase me and we'd run in big circles, which was my favorite part of the game. Other times she would yawn in fake boredom, so I'd come close again, tantalizing her with the rubber bone until she simply couldn't take it anymore and made another grab for it. I loved this game so much that when I slept I dreamed about it. Sometimes there were real bones, though, and these were handled differently. Carlos would come into the yard with a greasy bag, handing out charred treats and calling our names as he did so. Carlos didn't understand that he should always give one to Top Dog first, which was okay by me. I didn't always get a bone, but when I did, Carlos would say, "Toby, Toby," and hand it to me right past some other dog's nose. There were different rules when humans were involved. Once, when Fast got a bone and I didn't, I saw something extraordinary. Fast was hunkered down across the yard, chewing frantically, intoxicating odors wafting up from his prize. I'd slid over to watch enviously, so I was standing right there when Top Dog walked up. Fast tensed, spreading his legs a little as if getting ready to stand, and as Top Dog came forward, Fast stopped chewing and loosened a deep growl. No one ever growled at Top Dog. I sensed, though, that Fast was right. This was his bone, given to him by Carlos, and not even Top Dog could take it. But the bone was so delicious. Top Dog couldn't seem to help himself. He shoved his nose forward, and that's when Fast struck, a sharp click of his teeth right in Top Dog's face. Fast's lips were drawn back and his eyes were slits. Top Dog stared at him as if dumbfounded at this open rebellion, and then, with his head raised regally, he turned and lifted his leg on the fence, paying Fast no further attention. I knew that if Top Dog wanted to, he could have taken Fast's prize. Top Dog had that power, and he'd exerted it before. I'd seen what happened when, right around the time we took the truck ride to visit the nice lady in the cool building, the male dogs had assembled around one of the females, sniffing at her and lifting their legs with a certain frantic purpose. I was in the group, I'm sorry to say. There was just something so compelling about her, I can't even describe it. Every time a male tried to smell her from behind, the female sat in the dirt. Her ears were back in humility, but she also growled a few times, and when she did, the males backed off as if she had just been elected top dog. We were all gathered so close together it was impossible not to bump into one another, and that's when a fight erupted between Top Dog and the largest male in the pack, a huge black and brown dog whom Bobby called Rotty. Top Dog fought with expert efficiency, seizing Rotty by the back of the neck and dragging the dog's shoulders down to the ground. The rest of us gave the fight a wide berth, and it was over in seconds, really. Rotty flipping over on his back subserviently. The noise had drawn Carlos, though, who called, "Hey, hey, that's enough!" Carlos stood in the yard, ignored by the males, while Coco trooped over to him to be petted. After watching us a few minutes, Carlos called for the female, who had been getting all the attention, and took her outside the gate. I didn't see her again until we were all in the truck the next morning, headed out to see the nice lady in the cool room, and she was a front seat dog with the men. After Fast was finished with his bone, he seemed to have second thoughts about nipping at Top Dog. My brother hung his head, tail wagging low, and shambled over to where Top Dog was standing. Fast made several play bows, which Top Dog ignored, and then Fast licked Top Dog in the mouth. This seemed to be sufficient apology, so with that, Top Dog played with Fast a little, rolling my brother over and letting Fast chew at his neck before he abruptly walked away. This was how Top Dog maintained order, by keeping us all in our places, but not taking advantage of his position to steal food that was given to us by the men. We had a happy pack, right up until the day that Spike arrived. After that, nothing was the same. 4. It was starting to seem to me that just when I had life all figured out, it changed. When we were running with Mother, I learned to fear humans. I learned to scavenge for food. I learned how to placate Fast so he would be in what, for him, was a good mood. And then the men came and took us to the yard, and everything was different. In the yard, I adjusted quickly to life in the pack. I learned to love Senora and Carlos and Bobby, and just when my play with Coco was starting to assume a different, more complex character, we were taken to visit the nice lady in the cool room, and the urgency I'd been feeling went completely away. I still spent most of my day chewing on and being chewed by Coco, but without the odd compulsions that had occasionally seized me. In between the two worlds, the one outside and the yard, stood the gate Mother had opened. I thought about the night of her escape so many times I could practically feel the metal knob in my mouth. Mother had shown me a way to freedom if I wanted it. But I was a different dog than Mother. I loved the yard. I wanted to belong to Senora. My name was Toby. Mother, however, was so antisocial that no one seemed to notice she was gone. Senora had never even given Mother a name. Fast and Sister sniffed every so often at the depression behind the railroad ties where Mother had lain, but never showed any outward concern about her disappearance beyond that. Life went on, just as before. And then, with everyone's status in the pack settled, with me feeding at the adult trough, with Carlos sneaking us bones and Senora handing out treats and kisses, in came a new dog. His name was Spike. We'd heard the doors on Bobby's truck slam, so we were all barking, though it was so hot that day that some of us who were lying in the shade didn't even get off our bellies. The gate opened and Bobby entered, leading a large, muscular male on the end of his pole. Having the entire pack rush you at the gate was intimidating, but the new dog didn't budge. He was as dark and broad as Rotty and as tall as Top Dog. Most of his tail was missing, but what little stub he possessed wasn't wagging, and he stood with his weight balanced on all four legs. A low rumble emitted from his chest. "Easy, Spike. Okay there," Bobby said. The way Bobby said Spike, I knew that was his name. I decided to let everyone else have a turn at inspecting him before I did anything. Top Dog had, as usual, hung back, but now he emerged from the cool shadows near the waterspout and trotted forward to meet the new arrival. Bobby slipped the loop off Spike's neck. Easy now, Bobby said. Bobby's tension rippled through the pack, and I could feel the fur on my back rising up, though I wasn't sure why. Top Dog and Spike were stiffly examining each other, neither one backing down, the pack in a tight circle. Spike's face was covered with scars. Teardrop-shaped pits and lumps colored a pale gray against his dark fur. Something about the way Spike seemed to take us all in, every single one of us arrayed against him, made me afraid. Though the result was as it should be. Spike allowed Top Dog to put his head over his back, though he didn't bow or lower his stomach to the ground. Instead, Spike went over to the fence, carefully sniffed at it, and then lifted his leg. The males immediately lined up after Top Dog to do the same thing on the same spot. Senora's face appeared over the top of the gate then, and a lot of the anxiety I'd been feeling went away. Several of us broke from the circle and ran over to her, putting our legs on the fence so she could reach our heads. "See? He'll be okay," Senora said. "A dog like him's been bred to fight, Senora. He's not like the rest of them, no, ma'am." "You be a good dog, Spike," Senora called over to him. I looked jealously in the new dog's direction, but his reaction to having his name spoken was to glance over as if it were nothing at all. "Toby," I wanted her to say. "Good dog, Toby." Instead, she said, "There are no bad dogs, Bobby, just bad people. They just need love. Sometimes they're broke inside, Senora, and nothing will help them." Senora's hand absently reached down and scratched behind Coco's ears. I frantically shoved my nose underneath Senora's fingers, but she didn't even seem to know I was there. Later, Coco sat down in front of me with a rubber bone, gnawing on it industriously. I ignored her, still hurt that I, Senora's favorite, had been treated so dismissively. Coco flipped on her back and played with the bone with her paws, lifting it out of her mouth and dropping it, holding it so lightly that I knew I could take it, so I lunged. But Coco was rolling away from me, and then I was chasing her in the yard, furious that she had gotten the game all backward. I was so preoccupied with getting the stupid bone back from Coco because I was supposed to have it, not her, that I didn't see how it started. I just registered that suddenly the fight I think we'd all known was coming was already happening. Normally a fight with Top Dog was over quickly, the lower status dog accepting his punishment for challenging the order. But this horrible battle, loudly joined and viciously savage, seemed to last and last. The two dogs clashed with their forelegs off the ground, each vying to obtain the higher position, their teeth flashing in the sun. Their yowling was the most ferocious and terrifying thing I had ever heard. Top Dog went for his usual grip on the back of the neck, where control could be exerted without doing permanent damage, but Spike shook and snapped and bit until he had Top Dog's snout in his mouth. Though it had cost Spike a bloody tear under his ear, he now had the advantage over Top Dog, forcing our leader's head lower and lower toward the ground. The pack did nothing, could do nothing but pant and circle anxiously. But the gate swung open and Bobby came running in, pulling a long hose behind him. A jet of water hit both dogs. "Hey, cut it out! Hey!" he shouted. Top Dog went limp, acceding to Bobby's authority, but Spike held on, ignoring the man. "Spike!" Bobby yelled. He thrust his nozzle forward and blasted Spike right in the face with it, blood flying into the air. Finally, Spike broke away, shaking his head to get it out of the spray, and the look he turned on Bobby was murderous. Bobby backed away, holding the hose out in front of him. "What happened? Was it the new one? El Combatiente?" Carlos called, coming into the yard. "Sí, este perro será el problema," Bobby replied. Senora joined the men in the yard, and after much conferring, they called Top Dog over and tended to his wounds with a sharp-smelling chemical that I instantly associated with the nice lady from the cool room. Top Dog squirmed and licked and panted, his ears back, when Carlos dabbed something on the small cuts along his face. I never thought Spike would allow the same treatment, but he stood without protest when they worked on the cut under his ear. He seemed accustomed to it somehow, accepting the chemical smell as something that happened after a fight. The next several days were agony. None of us knew where we stood anymore, especially the males. Spike was unquestionably the leader now, a message he enforced by challenging every single one of us head-to-head in the yard. Top Dog had done the same, but not like this. For Spike, the most minor infraction was cause for discipline, and most punishment included a swift, painful nip. When play became too boisterous and too intrusive on Top Dog's area, he had always issued a cold warning in the form of a stare, perhaps a growl. Spike spent his day on patrol and would snap at us for no reason whatsoever. There was a black energy in him, something strange and mean. When the males jockeyed for new positions in the pack, challenging each other, Spike was there and, too often, would himself get involved, seemingly unable to hold back from plunging into the fray. It was unnecessary and distracting, causing so much tension that minor skirmishes began breaking out among us, fights for things that had been long ago decided, such as position at the food trough, or who would next get to lie in the part of the yard turned cool by the leaky water faucet. When Coco and I played our game where I had the rubber bone and she tried to steal it, Spike would come over, growling, and force me to drop the prize at his feet. Sometimes he would carry the bone back to his corner, ending the play until I could find another toy, and other times he would sniff at it contemptuously and leave it lying in the dirt. And when Carlos brought in his sack of bones, Spike didn't even bother to run over to see if he'd be given one. He'd wait until there were no men in the yard and then simply take what he wanted. Spike left some of the dogs alone, such as Rottie and Top Dog, and, oddly, Fast. But whenever I was lucky enough to sink my teeth into one of Carlos's delicious treats, I was resigned to the fact that Spike would soon be chewing on it instead. It was the new order. We might be having trouble figuring out the rules, but we knew who made them, and we all accepted them, which was why I was so surprised when Fast took Spike on. It was, of course, because of Sister. In a rare coincidence, the three siblings, Fast, Sister, and I, were standing by ourselves in the corner, investigating a bug that had crawled in from under the fence. Being in such free and simple association with my old family was so relaxing, especially after the stress-filled past few days, that I pretended that I had never seen anything more fascinating than a tiny black insect raising microscopic pincers, as if daring the three of us to fight. Thus distracted, none of us noticed Spike until he was upon us, and his quick, silent attack on Sister's haunches drew an instant frightened whelp from her. I instantly slunk to the ground. We'd been doing nothing wrong. But Fast couldn't take any more, and he lashed back at Spike, teeth flashing. Sister darted away, but I, propelled forward by a rage I'd never felt before, joined Fast in battle, the two of us snarling and biting. I tried to leap up and grab a hunk of Spike's back, but he turned and slashed at me, and as I stumbled backward, his jaws clamped down on my foreleg, and I let out a scream. Fast soon found himself pinned to the ground, but I wasn't paying attention. The pain in my leg was agonizing, and I limped off, still crying. Coco was there, licking at me anxiously, but I ignored her, making a beeline for the gate. Just as I knew he would, Bobby opened the gate and came into the yard, his hose in his hand. The fight was over. Fast had made peace, and Sister was hiding behind the railroad ties. So it was my leg that drew his attention. Bobby knelt in the dirt.
"Good dog, Toby. Okay, boy,"
he told me. I gave my tail a feeble wag, and when he touched my paw, sending a searing pain all the way up to my shoulder, I licked him in the face to let him know I knew he hadn't done it on purpose. Senora went with us to see the nice lady in the cool room. Bobby held me down while she poked me with the same chemical-smelling needle she'd used on me before, and then the pain in my leg didn't bother me anymore. I lay drowsily on the table while the lady tugged on my leg, listening to her voice as she spoke to Bobby and Senora. I could feel her concern, her caution, but couldn't make myself care as long as Senora stroked my fur and Bobby leaned into me to hold me still. Even as Senora drew in her breath when the nice lady in the cool room said, "Permanent damage," I didn't so much as raise my head. I just wanted to lie on the table forever, or at least until dinner. When I got back to the yard, I was wearing the stupid cone collar again, and I sported a hard lump of something encasing my wounded foot. I wanted to tear into the lump with my teeth, but not only did the collar look ridiculous, it also prevented me from getting at my foot. I could only walk on 3 legs, which Spike seemed to find amusing, because he came over to me and knocked me down with his chest. "Fine, Spike, go ahead. You are the ugliest dog I've ever seen." My leg hurt all the time, and I needed to sleep. And usually Coco came over and rested her head on me as I did so. Twice a day, Bobby came in and gave me a treat, and I pretended not to notice that there was something bitter inside the roll of meat, though sometimes, instead of swallowing it, I waited a bit and then spat it out. A small white thing, the size of a pea. I was still wearing the stupid collar the day all the men came. We heard several doors slamming in the driveway, so we took up our usual chorus of barking, though many of us went quiet when we heard Senora shriek, "No, no, you can't take my dogs!" The grief in her voice was unmistakable, and Coco and I nuzzled each other in alarm. What was going on? The gate swung open and several men cautiously entered the yard, carrying the familiar poles with them. Several held metal canisters out in front of them and were braced as if expecting an attack. Well, whatever this game was, most of us were willing to play. Coco was one of the first to approach, and she was snagged and pulled without resistance out through the gate. Most of the rest of the pack followed, lining up willingly, though several hung back. Sister, Fast, Spike, Top Dog, and myself, because I just didn't feel like limping over to them. If they wanted to play, let them play with Spike. Sister broke into a run around the perimeter of the yard as if expecting a hole to open. Fast went with her at first, and then stopped in despair, watching her panicked, pointless flight. 2 men closed in on her and captured her with a rope. Fast let them take him right away, so that he'd go with Sister, and Top Dog stepped forward with dignity when they called to him. Spike, though, fought the loop, growling savagely and snapping at them. The men yelled, and one of them directed a thin stream of liquid from his canister at Spike's face, the scent instantly burning my nose from all the way across the yard. Spike stopped fighting and fell to the ground, his paws over his snout. They dragged him out, and then came to me. "Nice doggy. You hurt your leg, boy?" one of the men asked. I gave my tail a feeble wag and ducked my head a little to make it easier for him to slip the loop over my head, which took a bit of doing because of my stupid plastic collar. Once outside the fence, I was upset to see Senora crying, struggling against Carlos and Bobby. Her sadness came off her and washed into me, and I pulled against the noose, wanting to go comfort her. One of the men tried to hand Senora a paper, but she threw it on the ground. "Why do you do this? We're not hurting anyone," Bobby shouted. His anger was clear and frightening. "Too many animals, poor conditions," the man with the paper said. He, too, radiated anger, and everyone was very tense and stiff. I noticed that his clothes were dark, and that he had metal flashing on his chest. "I love my dogs," Senora wailed. "Please don't take them from me." Senora was not angry. She was sad and afraid. "Inhumane," the man replied. I was mystified. Seeing the entire pack outside the yard, led one by one to cages on the trucks, was very disorienting. Most of us had our ears back and our tails submissively low. I was next to Rottie, whose deep, heavy woofing filled the air. My comprehension did not improve when we arrived at our destination, which smelled a little like the place with the nice lady in the cool room, but was hot and filled with loud, anxious dogs. I followed willingly and was somewhat disappointed to find myself shoved into a cage with Fast and Top Dog. I would have preferred Coco or even Sister, though my fellow males were as cowed as I was and regarded me without hostility. The barking was deafening, yet above it all I heard the unmistakable snarl of Spike in full attack, followed by a sharp squeal of pain from some unfortunate canine. Men yelled, and then a few minutes later Spike was led past us at the end of a pole, disappearing down a hallway. A man stopped in front of our cage. "What happened here?" he asked. The other man, the one who had just led Spike away, stopped and regarded me without interest. "I don't know." From the first man I sensed a caring tinged with sadness, but from the second man there was nothing but disinterest. The first man opened the door and gently probed my leg, pushing Fast's face away. "Oh, this is ruined," he said. I tried to communicate to him that I was a much better dog without the stupid collar on. "Unadoptable," the first man said. "We got too many dogs," the second man said. The first man reached inside the cone and smoothed my ears back. Though I felt disloyal to Senora, I licked his hand. He mostly just smelled of other dogs. "Okay," the first man said. The second man reached in and helped me jump to the ground. He slipped the loop of rope around me and led me back to a tiny, hot room. Spike was there, in a cage, while two other dogs I'd never met paced loose outside Spike's cage, giving it a wide berth. "Here, wait." The first man was at the door. He reached down and unsnapped the collar, and the air that rushed at my face was like a kiss. "They hate those things." "Whatever," the second man said. They shut the door behind them. One of the new dogs was an old female who sniffed my nose without much interest. Spike was barking, making the other dog, a younger male, nervous. With a groan, I slid down to lie on the floor. A loud hiss filled my ears, and the young male began to whine. Suddenly, Spike toppled to the floor with a crash, his tongue sliding out of his mouth. I regarded him curiously, wondering what he was up to. The old female slumped nearby, her head coming to rest against Spike's cage in a manner I was astounded he would allow. The young male whined, and I regarded him blankly, then shut my eyes. I felt overwhelmed with a fatigue as heavy and oppressive as when I was a small puppy, and my brothers and sister would lie on top of me, crushing me. That's what I was thinking about as I began to sink into a dark, silent sleep, being a puppy. Then I thought of running wild with Mother, and of Senora's caresses, and of Coco and the yard. Unbidden, the sadness I'd felt from Senora washed through me, and I wanted to squirm up to her and lick her palms and make her happy again. Of all the things I'd ever done, making Senora laugh seemed the most important. It was, I reflected, the only thing that gave my life any purpose. 5. At once, everything was both strange and familiar. I could clearly remember the loud, hot room, Spike filling the air with his fury and then abruptly falling into a slumber so deep it was as if he had opened a gate with his mouth and run away. I remembered becoming sleepy, and then there was the sense that much time had passed, the way a nap in the afternoon sun will span the day, and suddenly it will be time for the evening feed. This nap, though, brought me not just to a new time, but to a new place. Familiar was the warm, squirming presence of puppies on either side of me. Familiar, too, was the shoving clamber for a turn at the teat and the rich, life-giving milk that was the reward for all the pushing and climbing. Somehow I was a puppy again, helpless and weak, back in the den. But when I took my first bleary look at the face of my mother, she wasn't the same dog at all. Her fur was a light color, and she was larger than, well, than Mother. My brothers and sisters, 7 of them, shared the same light-colored fur, and when I examined my forelegs, I realized that I matched the rest of the litter as well. And not only were my legs no longer dark brown, they stretched out from me in perfect proportion to the rest of my body also. I heard a lot of barking and smelled many dogs nearby, but this wasn't the yard. When I ventured from the den, the surface beneath my pads was rough and hard, and a wire fence abruptly ended my exploration after half a dozen yards. It was a cage with a wire top and a cement floor. The implications of all this made me weary, and I stumbled back to the den, climbed up on top of a pile of siblings, and collapsed. I was a little puppy again, barely able to walk. I had a new family, a new mother, and a new home. Our fur was uniformly blonde, our eyes dark. My new mother's milk was far richer than what had come from my first mother. We lived with a man who came by with food for my mother, which she gulped down quickly before returning to the den to keep us warm. But what about the yard, and Senora, and Fast, and Coco? I could remember my life very clearly, and yet everything was different now, as if I had started over. Was that possible? I recalled Spike's outraged barking and how, as I fell asleep in that hot room, I was seized with an inexplicable question, a question of purpose. This didn't seem like the sort of thing a dog should think about, but I found myself returning to the issue often, usually as I was just dozing off for an irresistible nap. Why? Why was I a puppy again? Why did I harbor a nagging feeling that, as a dog, there was something I was supposed to do? Our enclosure didn't offer much to look at, and there was nothing fun to chew on except each other, but as my brothers and sisters and I became more aware, we discovered there were more puppies in a kennel to the right. Tiny, energetic little guys with dark markings and hair that stuck up all over the place. On the other side was a slow-moving female, all alone, with a hanging belly and distended teats. She was white, with black spots, and her coat was very short. She didn't walk around much and seemed pretty uninterested in us. About a foot of space separated the two kennels, so all we could do was smell the little puppies next to us, though they looked like they'd be fun to play with. Straight ahead was a long strip of lawn that beckoned with sweet odors of moist earth and rich green grass, but we were prevented from going out there by the locked door to the cage. A wooden fence encircled both the grassy area and the dog cages. The man wasn't anything like Bobby or Carlos. When he ventured into the kennel area to feed the dogs, he didn't speak much to any of us, radiating a bland indifference so at odds with the kindness of the men tending the dogs in the yard. When the puppies in the kennel next to us rushed over to greet him, he pushed them away from the dinner bowl with a grunt, letting the mother have access to her food. We were less coordinated in our attack and usually didn't manage to tumble our way to the cage door before he'd already moved on, and our mother let us know we were not to share her meal. Sometimes the man would be talking when he moved from cage to cage, but not to us. He spoke softly, focused on a piece of paper in his hands.
Yorkshire Terriers, week or so,
he said one time, looking in at the dogs in the cage to our right. He stopped in front of our pen and peered inside.
Golden Retrievers, probably 3 weeks yet, and got a Dalmatian ready to pop any day.
I decided my time in the yard had prepared me to dominate the puppies in my family, and was irritated they didn't feel the same way. I'd maneuver to grab one the way Top Dog had grabbed Rotty, and then 2 or 3 of my siblings would jump on top of me, not understanding the point of the whole thing at all. By the time I'd fought them off, the original target of my attentions would be off wrestling with someone else, as if it were all some kind of game. When I tried a menacing growl, though, I sounded ridiculously non-threatening, my brothers and sisters joyously growling back. One day, the spotted dog next to us drew our attentions. She was panting and pacing nervously, and we instinctively hung close to our mother, who was watching our neighbor intently. The spotted dog ripped up a blanket, shredding it with her teeth, and circled around several times before lying down with a gasp. Moments later, I was shocked to see a new puppy lying by her side, pure white and cloaked in a slippery-looking film, some kind of sack that the mother immediately licked off. Her tongue pushed the little puppy over, and after a minute, it groggily crawled toward its mother's teats, which reminded me that I was hungry. Our mother sighed and let us feed a while before she abruptly stood up and walked away, one of my brothers dangling along for a second before dropping off. I jumped on him to teach him a lesson, which wound up taking a lot of time. When next I glanced over at the spotted dog, there were 6 more white puppies. They looked spindly and weak, but the mother didn't care. She licked them, guiding them to her side, and then lay quietly while they fed. The man came and entered the cage where the newborns lay sleeping, looking them over before turning and walking away. Next, he opened the door for the furry-looking puppies in the kennel to the right of ours and released them into the grassy area. "No, not you," he said to the mother, blocking her way as she tried to follow. He shut her in and then put bowls of food down for the puppies, which they climbed in and licked off of each other. These idiots wouldn't last a day in the yard. The mother sat behind her cage door and whimpered until her brood had quit feeding, and then the man let her out to join her pups. The hairy little dogs came over to our cage door to sniff us, finally going nose to nose with us after living next door for these past few weeks. I licked at the goop on their faces, while one of my brothers stood on my head. The man left the puppies running free while he departed out of a gate in the wooden fence that was exactly like the one Carlos and Bobby always accessed to enter the yard. I watched jealously as the puppies ranged up and down the tiny patch of grass, sniffing hello to the other caged dogs and playing with each other. I was tired of being inside the pen and wanted to get out and explore. Whatever was my purpose in my new life, this didn't feel like it. After a few hours, the man returned, carrying another dog who looked exactly like the mother of the hairy puppies who were running free, except that he was a male. The man shoved the mother back into her pen and dropped the male in with her before shutting the gate, locking them in together. The male seemed pretty glad to see the mother, but she snarled at him when he jumped on her from behind. The man left the fence gate open behind him, and I was surprised at the feeling of longing that swept through me as I peered at the tiny sliver of outside world visible on the other side of the fence. If I were ever running free in the grass, I knew I would head right out that open gate. But naturally, the puppies who currently had that option didn't do anything about it. They were too busy wrestling. The mother raised her paws up on the cage door and cried softly as the man methodically rounded up her puppies and carried them out the gate. Soon, they were all gone. The mother dog paced back and forth in her cage, panting, while the male in the cage with her lay there and watched. I could feel her distress, and it unsettled me. Night fell, and the mother dog let the male lie with her. They seemed to know each other somehow. The male was only in there for a few days before he, too, was taken away. And then it was our turn to be let out. We tumbled out joyously, lapping up the food that was set out for us by the man. I ate my fill and watched my brothers and sisters go crazy, as if they'd never seen anything so exciting before as a bunch of dog food bowls. Everything was wonderfully moist and rich, not at all like the dry and dusty dirt in the yard. The breeze was cool and carried with it the tantalizing scent of open water. I was sniffing the succulent grass when the man returned to release our mother. My siblings bounded over to her, but I didn't, because I'd found a dead worm. Then the man left, and that's when I started thinking about the gate. There was something wrong with this man. He didn't call me Toby. He didn't even talk to us. I thought of my first mother, the very last time I saw her, escaping the yard because she couldn't live with humans, not even with someone as loving as Senora. But the man didn't love us at all. My gaze focused on the doorknob in the gate. There was a wooden table next to the door. By climbing up on a stool, I was able to get on the table, and from there I was just able to stretch out and put my mouth on the metal knob, which, instead of being round, was a strip of metal, a handle. My tiny teeth weren't very useful in getting a purchase on the thing, but I did my best to manipulate it the way Mother had the night she'd fled from the yard. Soon I lost my balance and toppled to the ground, the gate still locked. I sat and barked at it in frustration, my voice a tiny yip. My brothers and sisters raced over to jump on me in their usual fashion, but I turned from them in irritation. I was in no mood to play. I tried it again. This time I put my front paws on the knob to keep from tumbling to the ground, and as I did so, it fell away beneath me, so that my whole body hit the lever on my way down. I landed on the sidewalk with a grunt. To my astonishment, the gate edged ajar. I shoved my nose into the crack and pushed, and it swung wider. I was free! I eagerly scampered out into the open, my little legs tripping over themselves. A dirt path lay right in front of me, 2 tracks dug into sandy soil. I instinctively knew that was the way to go. After I'd run a few feet, I stopped, sensing something. I turned and looked back at my new mother, who was sitting just inside the open gate, watching me. I remembered Mother back in the yard, glancing once at me before heading back out into the world. My new mother wouldn't be joining me, I realized. She was staying with the family. I was on my own. Yet not for a moment did I hesitate. I knew from past experience that there were better yards than this, with loving people who would stroke my fur with their hands. And I knew that the time for suckling at my new mother's teat was at an end. It was just how it was supposed to work. A dog eventually separated from his mother. But mostly I knew an opportunity was in front of me that was irresistible. A whole new world to be explored with long, if somewhat clumsy, legs. The dirt track eventually led to a road, which I decided to follow, if for no other reason than the fact that it led straight into the wind, which was bringing me wonderful new scents. Unlike the yard, which had always been parched, I smelled damp, rotting leaves and trees and pools of water. I skipped forward, the sun in my face, happy to be free, off on an adventure. I heard the truck coming long before I saw it, but was so busy trying to catch an amazing winged bug, I didn't even look up until the door slammed. A man with wrinkled, tanned skin and muddy clothes knelt down, his hands out in front of him. "Hey there, little fella," he called. I regarded him uncertainly. "You lost, fella? You lost?" Wagging, I decided he must be okay. I trotted over to him, and he picked me up, holding me high over his head, which I didn't appreciate very much. "Oh, you're a pretty little fella. You look like a purebred retriever. Where did you come from, fella?" The way he was speaking to me reminded me of the first time Senora called me Toby. I instantly understood what was happening. Just as the men had pulled my first family from the culvert, this man had taken me from the grass. And now my life would be what he decided it would be. Yes, I decided, my name could be Fella. I was thrilled when he sat me down inside the front of the truck, right beside him. The front seat! The man smelled like smoke and had an eye-watering tang to him that reminded me of when Carlos and Bobby would sit out in the yard at a small table and talk and hand a bottle to each other. He laughed when I tried to climb up to lick his face and continued to chuckle as I squirmed around in the narrow places of the truck, taking in rich, strange odors. We bumped along for a while, and then the man stopped the truck.
"We're in the shade here,"
he told me. I looked around blankly. A building with several doors was directly in front of us, and from one of them came strong chemical smells, exactly like those coating the man.
"I'm just gonna stop for one drink,"
the man promised, rolling up the windows. I didn't realize he was leaving until he had slipped out and shut the door behind him, and I watched in disillusionment as he entered the building. What about me? I found a cloth strap and chewed on it for a little while, until I got bored and put my head down to sleep. When I awoke, it was hot. The sun now came full force into the truck, the cab airless and humid. Panting, I started whimpering, putting my paws up so I could see where the man had gone. There was no sign of him. I dropped my feet, which were literally burning from the windowsill. I had never felt such heat. An hour or so went by as I paced back and forth across the scorching front seat, panting harder than I ever had in my life. I began to quiver, and my vision was swimming. I thought of the faucet in the yard. I thought of my mother's milk. I thought of the spray from the hose Bobby used to break up dog fights. Blearily, I noticed a face staring in the window at me. It wasn't the man. It was a woman with long black hair. She looked angry, and I backed away from her, afraid. When her face vanished, I lay back down, nearly delirious. I didn't have the energy to pace anymore. I had an odd heaviness in my limbs, and my paws were beginning to twitch of their own accord. And then there was a hard crash, rocking the truck. A rock tumbled past me, bouncing off the seat and falling to the floor. Clear pebbles showered down on me, and a cool kiss of air swept in over my face. I lifted my nose to it. I was limp and helpless when I felt hands slide around my body and raise me into the air, too exhausted to do anything but hang slackly in her hands. "Oh, you poor puppy, you poor puppy," she whispered. "My name is Fella," I thought to myself. 6. Nothing in my life has ever